CharacterScan by Douglas Kruger. Read by the author. Copyright Penguin Random House 2023. Production copyright Douglas Kruger 2023. This story is dedicated to Vanessa. I read her innermost nature. Finding great value, I stole her away. TK. Masks camouflage the faces of both good and evil. Keeps hidden what is a truth and what is a lie. Patty Roberts. History is a vast early warning system. Norman Cousins. 1. Looking back, Katrina was aware of her gift well before her birth, in the embryonic semi-consciousness of her mother's womb. It wasn't supposed to be possible to remember that far back. Everyone said so. Memories, real memories, were only meant to start at 3 or 4. Even as a teenager, Katrina could clearly recall those dark, warm months, the liquid months, the before months. She could remember a sense of the being around her, the person to whom she was so intimately connected, from whom sustenance was piped into her belly. Her impression, not a clear thought in language, just a sense, was of someone full of tenderness and love, and, occasionally, great fear. Her second encounter, reading the essence of a person, this she also would remember into adolescence, was with the physician who delivered her. Dr. Finn Kestner pulled Katrina out into the world in the usual ritual, unceremoniously and with a distanced impatience, within a building barely big enough to prop up the word clinic in a town some miles out of Dallas. Katrina's impression of this person, this doctor, was distinctly disagreeable. For starters, his hands were cold on her flesh. But it wasn't just that. Experiencing him was somehow like the sensation of biting into soft fruit, just to grind your teeth on the pip when you were completely off your guard. That's how she would remember it in later life. As Katrina was pulled headfirst into the world, suspended upside down and spanked to force an intake of air, she was completely off her guard. She had developed no defenses. Whatever part of her was able to detect the goodness or the badness in others had not yet formed any powers of discretion. She could not yet switch it on or off at will. It was raw and exposed like a sensitive nerve. Bad people made it hurt. Dr. Finn Kestner made it hurt. You gotta show us yours and we'll show you ours. Hey, Cat, get down here. You gotta listen to the rules. A small female hand pulled Katrina by the shirt, from where she was scanning for grown-ups, down to where the 3 other kids squatted, hashing out how this thing would work. There were 2 boys and 2 girls, just the right number for it. The biggest boy, who was 6 years old, said, "Okay, now you 2 gotta go first." He had broad shoulders for his age, dirty fingernails, and he forgot to close his mouth when parked in idle. Katrina's girlfriend, whom the adults called Tinker, but the kids had shortened to Tinks, said, "Why us? Just 'cause we girls. Boys are supposed to be brave." This fine argument caused a moment of awkward silence. Tinks added, "You show us yours first." 5 years after their daughter's birth, Katrina's mother and father now occupied their 3rd home in a 3rd state. This one was off the I-25 in Bernalillo County, New Mexico. On the outer fence, a wooden board emblazoned with a painted rose over a sunburst announced in once bright letters that this was Stubbys Trailer Park. Stubbys was really a cluster of semi-permanent motorhomes, skulking just too close together for any real privacy, even though the grounds were large. Katrina's parents were still considering whether or not to marry, so that her mom's surname would become the same as her dad's, Hunt. At present, it was Mindelow. To the motley gang of children who flocked together in Stubbys Park, barefoot and happily unaware of their poverty, the camp was divided into inside and outside, and they played their games and carried out their intrigues accordingly. Any games involving a ball or stones or making small bombs from Coke bottles had to be played outside, away from the homes. Riding bikes, chasing each other, or just goofing off, the stuff adults could see, could be done inside. The terms were deceptive. Inside merely implied under the tight cluster of ash-grey trees that formed a canopy over the 30 or so homes. Inside was never really that good, because the adults parked their old cars and pickup trucks just about everywhere, and if you ran around barefoot, there were a lot of stones. On a hot July evening, Katrina Hunt was not just outside, but all the way over at the boundary, the mythical and scary far side of outside. She was not strictly allowed to be there. The worry that her parents might hit her or shout at her if they found out weighed at the back of her mind, just beneath the bouncing red pigtails that made her so easy to pick out in a crowd. Katrina's parents had never hit her. Nor did they regularly shout at her, the way some of the other kids' parents did. One of the boy's moms regularly chased him with a stick if he broke a window or bullied his brother. Mostly, Katrina's parents shouted at each other, while she hovered like a ghost in the background. If Katrina had been a little more sophisticated than her 5 summers allowed, she might have realized that it was not the idea of a scolding that bothered her. It was the sense she got from them when they were agitated, the colors and flavors, and the great fear that her mom in particular gave off. The fear clouds felt yucky. "You said we should do it," the younger boy said. He was 5 years old, smaller than his friend, and his voice was screechy. His hair was combed to an iron side parting and gelled down, a parent's attempt to disguise poverty with careful grooming. Katrina was still unaware that other people could not sense each other. She could clearly feel that inside thing that pulsed in each of them that summer evening, out of sight of the trailer park, and behind an abandoned 1960s police car whose floor was almost rusted out. Even though outside was mostly wind-blown sand at this scorching time of year, at the boundary, the patchy grass grew so thick beneath the car's rusted frame that no one could see under it. That made it perfect for hiding behind. Katrina's friend Tinker had brought a threadbare blanket. They all knelt on it, negotiating in urgent, whispered tones. The boys seemed hesitant. This had been Tinker's idea. For a long time, she'd been whispering in Katrina's ear about going to the far side of outside with some of the boys, behind the old police car, and letting them look. Looking at theirs. "Fine," the feisty little girl replied. "I'll go first." Katrina could feel 2 things from her friend with the freckly nose, the fine-boned petite features, and the auburn hair. The first was anger, but it was not serious anger. Perhaps it was closer to irritation, or maybe impatience. But the second was something she did not know very well. It was sort of purpley blue, and it was pulsing like a heartbeat. Katrina closed her eyes for a second, trying to concentrate on what that strange thing was that her friend Tinker was experiencing. Sometimes closing her eyes helped. Seeing people and feeling their feelings were 2 different things. What people said and did, and what they actually were sometimes not the same, and she already trusted the feeling more. She sampled the throbbing blue in her friend. It was faint, as though not yet fully developed, but it was definitely there. It was actually quite beautiful in a new flowery, excited girl sort of way. The closest Katrina could come to describing it was girl need. The boys had it too. The feelings inside each person didn't really get mixed up or blur with others' feelings, even if they were sitting close together. She could clearly discern each of them from the other. And, to her surprise, she didn't like what she was getting from the boys. There was the need too, boy need, But somehow it wasn't as okay as Tink's girl need was. Theirs had red in it, and it was a bit threatening. There was something about it that was similar to what she felt in bullies who shoved. She squinted as she concentrated on them. They were all about, what? Taking? Pushing down? A word like domineering was not in Katrina's vocabulary. And there was more. Katrina tilted her head, dug a little deeper, concentrated on the inside of them, their clouds, their colors. They didn't like the girls. That much was very clear. Suddenly, Katrina didn't feel like going ahead with this anymore. "What's your friend doing?" the older boy said to Tinks. Then turning to Katrina, he said, "Why are you closing your eyes like that?" She's just a scaredy," said the younger one, although his body language and his inner color showed that he was the nervous one. People did that a lot. Tried to say that another person was feeling exactly what they were feeling. Katrina wondered why they did that. The boy popped up from his haunches, stole a glance over the police car, then bobbed back down, looking for a moment like a guilty-faced jack-in-the-box. "Well, not all girls are scaredies." Tinks gave a snotty flick of her auburn hair. "I'll just go first." She nudged her friend. "Cat, when I go first, go with me." Katrina nodded slightly and did as she was told. Both girls began undressing. She glanced at the boys as she did so, and it was as though they had somehow switched off. They sat dead still, jaws hanging, staring. Katrina felt the redness in them grow. The scene was oddly quiet, oddly awkward, and for many years to come, Katrina would remember the strange moment when she undressed with her friend, while two boys watched, beside a rusted police car, at the far side of outside, on a sweltering New Mexico evening. The only sound was the soft sloughing of a lazy wind over brush grass. Getting undressed was no elaborate affair. There was not much to remove. Tinker wore a t-shirt and dirty blue corduroy pants with an elastic waistband, while Katrina wore short blue denim pants and a shirt. Even in the trailer park, there were levels of poverty, and it showed when the girls were free of their play clothes and down to their panties. Katrina was the wealthier of the two. Her yellow ones, with the floral pattern, had no holes or tears. The little girl with the auburn hair was not so fortunate, and the boys laughed when they saw hers, plain, drab, tired, and undecorated, a number of small tears and holes at the edges. Almost instantly, Tink's purple throb turned into a citrus-sharp embarrassment. Both girls were standing in nothing but their panties, but Katrina's friend had gooseflesh all down her legs, despite the heat of the setting sun. To help her friend, Katrina said to the boys, "So what? She's braver than you. You haven't even gone yet." Tinks found her voice. The momentary embarrassment was replaced with defiance. "Yeah, now you guys gotta go. We done it." "You gotta go panties off first," the older boy said, pointing. "Nuh-uh," Tinks replied. "First you gotta take off down to your jocks. Then we'll all take our underwear off together, same time." The boys looked at each other, upset by the inarguable fairness of this proposal. In the silence that followed, a truck could be heard, downshifting, way out on the highway. The bleak white sands and grey trees were made momentarily beautiful by the golden light. In the distance, they could hear the radios and barking dogs of the trailer park, faintly and in fragments. "Fine," the older boy said. Katrina stood with her arms needlessly crossed over her flat chest. Tinks didn't bother. Her hands hung down beside her worn panties. She played absent-mindedly with a loose thread. Katrina watched as the two boys self-consciously removed items of clothing from their bodies. They stood close together, as she did with Tinks, as though they were two separate camps, boys versus girls, as though it were easier if your whole team was doing it too. Soon enough, All four stood in awkward silence. The younger boy had rocket ships on his underpants. The older boy wore a pair of swimming shorts, all the underwear he owned. "Okay, now everything," said the older boy. "But girls go first, not together." "Why?" Tinks asked. "'Cause just go," he said in exasperation, actually stomping a bare foot on the blanket. "If you do it, then we'll do it." Tinks and Katrina looked at each other again, unspoken questions crackling between them like static electricity. Katrina could tell that the throbbing blue was back up in her friend. She really wanted to do this. Strange. Katrina was excited too, but a little nervous about that something hostile that was still evident and, in fact, still growing in the boys. That foreign something that wanted to take. "Come on, Cat. Let's pull ours down together," Tinker said. "Okay. When I say 3, we do it, okay? Okay? Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3. There was less duplicity among the girls than the boys. Tinks and Katrina intended to go together, and neither reneged on 3. However, despite the suddenness implied by the countdown, the two girls both moved slowly, gingerly, each looking to be sure that the other actually did it. But by slow inches, they did lower their panties down to the ground and stood in the puddled fabric. The boys stared hard until the two girls could no longer hide their embarrassment, and both placed their hands protectively over themselves. "You mustn't block. How are we supposed to see?" "Well, it's you now," Tinks demanded. "Go, then we won't block." The countdown had set a precedent. The older of the two boys headed up this ritual for his team. 1, 2, 3. Katrina watched as their underwear slid down and their little acorns popped out. They looked funny. The older boy had stepped out of his swim shorts. The younger one still stood with his rocket ship underpants around his ankles, as though eager to hoist them up again. Tinks was also staring. She surprised Katrina by announcing, "Now touching." "What?" Katrina said. Tinks didn't bother to answer. Still looking at the boys, she said, "You can touch ours and we touch yours. Let's sit." Although she was nervous, Katrina may have gone through with this revised plan. Except that the feeling she got from the boys was getting worse. Their red was growing somehow stronger, maybe even uglier. She got the distinct feeling these boys wanted to, she didn't quite know what. Rob something? Take? Eat? It was like the feeling she got from one of the kids when they bragged about how they were going to steal, and yet it was also somehow different, more basic. "I don't want to," Katrina said. "Cat, you gotta! Come on!" Tink spoke through clenched teeth. "What if someone comes looking?" "They won't. No one comes here. Come on, Cat." The boys had sat themselves down on the blanket, cross-legged. The younger boy was flicking idly at himself without realizing it. "You go," Katrina said. "I'll stay, but I don't want to do touching." In the background, the smaller boy whispered to the bigger one, "My mom says a girl's thing is poison for boys." "No, it's not," the older one countered. "Your mom's just telling you so you won't do stuff like this." After a long, trying stare, Tink's body language changed from pleading to a swanky dismissal that seemed to say, "I'll show you." She turned from Katrina and sat down right in front of the boys, who continued to stare at her body, full of the greedy boy hunger. Katrina slowly took her place down on the blanket beside them. The touching that day was minimal, tentative, and superficial, and involved only the boys and Tinks. And though Katrina watched everything, the throbbing red in the boys never gave rise to the bloodthirsty riot or whatever frenzy it was she had feared. Perhaps that particular type of red in boys didn't do that. She didn't know. But whatever it did do, it felt kind of scary. Either way, Katrina was glad when it was finally over, and they all pulled up their underwear. Evening progressed, and the sky darkened. They heard one of the boys' moms shouting for them from the trailer park, and all four swore never, ever to tell, even as they struggled into their clothes. The oldest boy said that he and his friend should go first, and then the girls should go later, so that they weren't all seen coming out together. "Psst, you want to come play at my place?" Katrina asked Tinks. "No," the freckle-faced girl responded. "I'm not doing anything with you. You didn't go with." Despite her defiant tone, Katrina picked up something else in the girl. Under the anger, she could read a mixture of fear and loneliness. "I got dirty. Why didn't you?" Katrina's father was inside their trailer, reading. As she approached, walking alone beneath the cool evening air of the grey trees, she could see the top of his hair through the window, beneath the lamp that turned his side of the trailer home a very warm, yellowy orange. He had a habit of pulling at the hair on the crown of his head as he read, and Katrina could see him doing it now through the bug mesh. The air was filled with the sounds of evening, televisions from the homes, the hissing of red meat cooking on grills, mothers shouting at children to wash up in a mix of English and Spanish, and of dogs of indiscernible lineage barking happily at whatever movement or activity piqued their interest. "Hey there, little kitty cat!" An overweight man in dungarees leaned against a neighbor's old Chevrolet, talking it up with a couple of his tenants. The radio in the car was on, turned to a country station. "Hey, you Stubby!" Katrina waved and smiled. She had never known the man as anything else, and would have sworn with her hand on the Bible that that was his real name. She wondered whether anything about her betrayed the guilt of what she had just been doing, and she looked herself quickly up and down. But the older man with the 2-day-old beard and the friendly manner didn't seem to be treating her any differently than usual. "Got a letter for your mommy and daddy. Stuffed it in here somewheres." He drove one meaty arm into the front pocket of his dungarees and dug around. "Okay," Katrina said, and waited patiently. When one arm didn't produce results, Stubby balanced the beer in his other hand on the Chevy. Its ponytailed owner didn't seem to mind. He was sitting up on the roof, drinking from a whiskey bottle. A cat slunk around the back tires, touching its nose to a puddle at the end of a hose. "Aha! There you are, you little scoundrel!" Stubby pulled a slightly crumpled and sweat-soaked envelope out of his clothes with a magician's flourish. "Would you give it to him, Kit Kat?" "Sure thing, Stubby." Stubby smelled bad, but he felt nice. There was no threat in him whatsoever. She sometimes watched television at his place because their trailer didn't have a TV. Dad preferred that they should read, though Mom hardly ever did. When she did, it was magazines, and Dad made noises about those, before disappearing back into his book. Katrina occasionally snuck over to Tinker's place to watch grown-up shows like Full House or The Simpsons. "Y'all have a nice evening," Katrina said to the two men, and they tipped their heads in response. "Little Miss Texas, such good manners for such a little thing. Hey, tell your ma we're wood-smoking ribs tomorrow if she want to come." "Will do, Stubby." Up a couple of steps, Katrina opened the front door and was met by classical music. She knew to shut the door immediately. Her dad didn't like other people to hear it. They laughed at him. "Hey, Daddy!" Katrina once again hoped that her indiscretions didn't show in any way. The man looked up from a small edition by Viktor Frankl. Beside him was a copy of Popular Mechanics magazine. He looked easily in his mid-30s, with rings under his eyes, and he moved with a certain heaviness. His driver's license said that he was 27. After regarding her for a second, he replied in a soft, almost detached voice. "Hey, Pumpkin Pie, where have you been?" "Just playing. Where's Mama?" "Who knows, babykins? That's the question, isn't it? Work, I suppose. I'm sure she'll be back soon." Katrina stood in the entranceway, surrounded by the entirety of her family's earthly possessions. There were clothes in a small hamper, all 3 family members piled together, and dirty clothes on the floor beside the hamper. There was a kitchenette with coffee stains down the faux wood paneling, and a bathroom like one might find on an aircraft, only this one managed by a miracle of ergonomics to include a shower as well. On the windowsill were a couple of potted plants, her mother's attempt at beautification. There was her small cot bed and her parents' bigger bed. Her father sat on the corner of the big bed, his feet up on a stool, the yellow lamp lighting his reading. The tiny portable radio beside him went silent, then segued into the opening bars of Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1 in B-flat minor. "What you doing, Daddy?" "Just reading, baby." "Reading what?" The young man sat upright slowly, put his feet on the floor, and regarded her for a second, as though the question she'd asked had not been a casual one. Then he smiled in the considered, almost patronizing way an old man might. "Well, if you must know, a book. And before that, I was reading an article about a man in Scotland who believes that he can use maps of the human genome to ascertain the merits or demerits of fundamental human nature. Literally read people and know all their proclivities in one swoop. Imagine that. Personally, I think he's nuts. But it wouldn't surprise me if the people at Google bought his research. In fact, I'd be astonished if they didn't." "Daddy, you talk funny." "That I do, baby girl. That I do indeed. Not like Mama." This comment caused the man a moment's pause. His eyes drifted inward to some distant place, the way kings of old may have reminisced about a fatal mistake on fields of lost battles. Finally, he responded, "No, not at all like your mother." Sensing she had said something untoward, Katrina backed off. She went over to a pile of old dolls that a Presbyterian church had donated to her family and picked out her favorite, an actual Barbie doll, with all its limbs intact. She sat brushing its stringy hair and singing to it, under her voice, so that she didn't disturb Daddy's reading and listening. As she played with the doll's clothes, she remembered taking off her own for the boys. She remembered how they had snickered at Tinker's worn-out underwear. She still felt a little hurt by Tinks. Hurt, but sorry for her at the same time. "Hey there, missus, how's your day?" they heard outside. "Hey, Stubby, all good and you?" "Mama!" Katrina exclaimed, popping up and running to the door. Her father turned off the radio. When the door opened, a young woman in tight jeans and a t-shirt emblazoned with the legend "Billy's Burger Pad" stood chewing gum and smiling into the room. She had the same red hair as her daughter, just a few shades darker. One too many bracelets dangled about her thin wrists, and the toes of her white sneakers showed early signs of peeling back. Her belly ring was visible beneath the t-shirt. Katrina hit her like a torpedo. "Mama! Hey, you baby girl, you missed the heck out of me like I told you to?" "Uh-huh, did you miss me?" "Gonna give you a big squidgy kiss in the ear!" The little girl shrieked. "Right in the ear, squirrel, here it comes! Ker-smacko! Mama!" Katrina's mother was 22 years old and very nearly beautiful. Acne scars on her shoulders and a nose that was slightly too big, combined with skin that shone with all the dullness cheap soap could buy, conspired against her. Still holding Katrina against her leg, the woman addressed the man behind the magazine. "Hey, baby." Her voice was now tentative. "Hi there. How was your day?" she probed softly, still standing on the spot. "Fine. Yours?" Katrina felt that flash of all-too-familiar fear in her mother. She could never quite understand it. Why? It's Daddy. Why are you scared of Daddy? But she could also sense that it wasn't quite scared of Daddy. It was closer to scared to do with Daddy. "I got a big old bunch of tips today. Good steaks. I had a whole ass, but I reckon we'll make it this month," she said with a smile. "Maybe we can even look at that dishwasher. That's a game changer right there," he answered. "I sent my curriculum vitae to a number of places, but I doubt my chances. Not too many engineering companies actively trawling for college dropouts." There was a moment of silence in which the noises from outside intruded. Stubby laughing with his tenants, a television game show next door. Katrina's mother could have finished his sentence with, "College dropouts who abandoned their dreams to take care of an accidental family. But that would simply have started up the old argument, the dance that had grown tired. "Hang in there, babes, you'll get it. Love you loads," she said. "Mama, Stubby gave me a letter for you, and he says they're doing ribs tomorrow." "Did he, baby girl? Give here, let me check it out." Katrina handed her the envelope, and her mother tore it open inexpertly. She read it on the spot. "Geez Louise," she said. Then a few moments later, "Oh, God." Profanity was not in her nature, and the young man glanced up. "What is it?" "Here, read this." She handed him a newspaper clipping from a county newspaper in Texas. It was dated last week. "Your sis sent it. There's a note, too, but it just says to read it and also love ya." "Clippings like this will soon be obsolete," Katrina's father said. "The internet'll make it all digital." He smoothed the paper on top of his magazine and read, "Doctor to serve multiple life sentences. Dramatic court case results in guilty verdict for baby brutalizing Doc." The county of Kaufman was stunned today when a jury found Dr. Finn Kestner, a longtime practitioner and once respected member of the community, guilty on 32 counts of intentionally suffocating newborn babies, many of whom had some physical disability. Dr. Kestner, dubbed the Baby Butcher, is said to have carried out his reign of terror over a period of 7 years. Though convicted on 32 counts, he is suspected of killing as many as 50 infants. His motives remain unclear. Judge Terence Sutherland delivered a terse address during sentencing, which took place immediately following the announcement of the verdict. While the motive for Dr. Kestner's actions is unknown, members of the community have postulated a number of theories, the most plausible of which relates back to pharmaceutical giant Avricon, an organization that has categorically denied. While her father read, Katrina said to her mother, "Mama, I'm hungry." Her mother boiled a kettle and poured steaming water into a tub of instant noodles. She stirred, added some cold water, then handed the tub to Katrina along with a plastic spoon. Same as last night, Katrina thought. She took the tub and went to sit beside her dolls. Isn't he?" her father began. "Uh-huh. Same exact guy delivered Katrina," she answered. "Yeah. Geez, can you imagine?" "What guy, Mama?" Katrina asked. It's nothing, baby. Don't you worry. Just me and Daddy talking." "My Lord," her father said. "What, Daddy? Mama, what?" "Not so loud, baby love. It's an ugly story in the newspaper. Nothing you need to know." "But what?" "Stop it. It's just a doctor we once knew who was hurting some people. But they made him quit it, and he's going to jail now, so everything's okay." The little girl settled down again. She had forgotten the tub of noodles in her hand and was gently pouring small amounts of oxtail instant sauce over the rim and into her lap. She spotted the error and corrected it, rubbing at the fabric. "He's a bad man, that doctor," Katrina said in a tiny voice. "Yes, he is, baby, very bad," Katrina's mom replied, not realizing that her daughter's comment was not a general conversational observation, but a distinct, personal memory. When they weren't fighting, Katrina loved listening to the sounds of her parents' voices. She lay in her cot bed, eyes closed and a My Little Pony coverlet pulled up to her cheeks, too stimulated to sleep, but enjoying the incomprehensible music of vowels and consonants as Mama and Daddy sorted through the day. Daddy's sounds were so different to Mama's. Her sounds were nice, like a catchy song you remembered easily, like a country song. But Daddy was something else, more like the complicated music he listened to. You could like it, but you had to try. He was involved and hard to understand, and so often she turned over in her bed, facing the wall, and tried to define what Daddy was. Sad. Or maybe like something that was once going to be really, really amazing, but never happened. Or like going to your favorite toy store and seeing it closed. Or like no dessert when you really think you'll get. That's what he feels like. He feels like almost. He feels like too late. As the mingling of her parents' subdued voices lulled her ever closer to sleep, Katrina remembered how she had pleaded with Tinker, running together across the gravel expanse of outside, past tufts of feathergrass, their pigtails bobbing almost in time. "Come on, Tinks, please don't be mad. Come play at my place, just for a bit. We're friends." "You made me go alone. I hate you." "I'm sorry." She had slowed to a walk, slightly out of breath, and to her relief, her friend slowed beside her. "I'm real sorry. I didn't wanna, but I still want to be your friend. I don't want you to hate me." Tinker walked in militant silence for a while, as Katrina looked at her sidelong. The slighted girl stomped as she walked, raising puffs of dust. A stone shot out before them, sent from the tips of Tinker's small, angry sneaker. Then, all of a sudden, she stopped and faced Katrina square on. "Okay, we can still be friends, but you gotta promise right now never to let me go alone again." "Okay." "Promise." "I promise." "Pinky promise, so it always counts forever." "Okay, pinky promise." Standing about 20 yards short of the silvery canopy of blue spruce trees hanging over their homes like an old derelict protecting his cache of bottles, their pinkies locked together in meaningful communion, the two girls looked each other solemnly in the eyes and swore their oaths. Katrina truly meant to keep up her side of the bargain. Pinky promise, so it always counts. Her heart was earnest in this matter, and it beat faster with surges of conviction. She would stand by her friend's side. She would not let Tinks go alone, anywhere, or through anything, so long as they both should live. It was a commitment that was not to be tested for another 11 years. 2. Edinburgh, Scotland. Dr. Hugh Martin had just electrocuted himself, again. He couldn't have cared less. His 6'2" frame was pulsing with the adrenaline of a man whose life's work has suddenly, startlingly, come to fruition. It felt like he'd been grappling with the gods for the better part of a decade. And after toying bemusedly with this persistent mortal, the Pantheon had wearied of his entreaties, relented, and just handed him the key. All of it. The full algorithm. And nothing about the vista showed that a miracle had just occurred. Outside his third-story window, the pouring rain smudged the outlines of the old grey stone city and the proud castle that had towered over it for 1,000 years. At least it hadn't resumed snowing today. That probably wasn't far behind. It was a bitterly cold December evening, and most of the staff at Edinburgh University had already checked themselves out for the Christmas holidays. Dr. Hugh Martin was incapable of checking out, physically or emotionally. He thought of himself as a latter-day Nikola Tesla, and cherished the hours spent working alone in this lab. A series of electrodes taped to his hands, neck, chest, and head connected him with the desk and computer systems. Beside him, out of a simple HP printer, a ream of paper poured continuously onto the floor. It drew a wavering line over a series of connected pages, not unlike a polygraph. And this simple printout, this simple line, he knew beyond all doubt, would be the achievement of the century. If they colonized Mars before 2100, it still might not be as significant as what was happening here, now, though he could readily concede that his particular breakthrough may not look as spectacular as a Martian settlement. In fact, it looked ridiculously ordinary for something about to alter the course of world history. Still, this was the big one, the game changer for the species. And it hasn't happened at MIT, Dr. Martin gloated. It hasn't happened in Tokyo or Berlin, London or Silicon Valley. Screw Tel Aviv and sod San Francisco. It happened right here, in the medical school buildings in Teviot Place, tonight. If the development of Scottish science and medicine had ever been flagging behind world industry standards, it was now right back at the forefront again, indisputably, and to a degree that would emulate the global impact of, say, Microsoft. Dr. Martin smiled to himself. Sell this algorithm to a global search engine, and he could become the wealthiest man, well, maybe not on Earth. That was currently Bill Gates. But certainly in Britain, maybe eventually on Earth. Smiling fantasies of his life to be gave way to a wince as another stab of pain emanated from his hand. The skin at the tips of his left fingers, he was a southpaw, had actually burnt a charcoal black from the voltage. That would have to be recalibrated, made user-friendly. But the fact was, it worked. The damn thing worked. That was his own character scan he saw rolling out in paper piles on the floor. It showed a reasonable balance, alongside a slight propensity for selfishness. But what of it? Selfish men moved the world forwards because their will made things happen. He didn't try to argue with the result. It was absolutely correct. Instead, he saw his quirk as a virtue. The implications of what he had achieved rolled over Dr. Hugh Martin in wave after wave as he pulled the electrodes from his body. For many years, through incessant board meetings, through grants and denials of grants, through all the arguments and applications for extensions, and denials and subsequent remissions and periods of grace, he had known that what he was doing was visionary. In fact, it was more than visionary. Revolutionary was the correct word. It was on the same scale as the invention of flight, or the discovery of penicillin, or Watson and Crick's double helix, on which it somewhat relied. He ran both palms down the grisly, unshaven cheeks, where the hair had grown coarse over the 40-some years since puberty. He stared into space for a moment. His hair was mostly Celtic black, but it was softening to white in patches on his chin and around his ears. That had been bothering him lately, but not today. He felt like running into the streets. Naked was the traditional manner, was it not? Shouting, "You fucking reeker!" It occurred to him that perhaps he should embark on some dramatic act, create his own version of the "one small step for man" maxim. Do something outlandish and unforgettable that would then enter the history books as the moment of quirky genius from the man who had invented CharacterScan. At the very least, it could become a good meme. He couldn't think of a damn thing. Nada. Besides, that was Scottish weather out there. It called for 5 layers and a waterproof coat, not nudity. Best he might hope for would be to head down to the southern for a pint of craft. CharacterScan. He had already named his invention, although, in truth, there lay a sticking point. Technically, it was intellectual property owned and tied down by the McFadden Enterprises Group of Edinburgh. Actually, that was a big sticking point. But it should be possible to get around it. He would declare his research complete, then secretly sell it for an obscene amount to a massive global buyer, then buy an island from which he could never be extradited. Of course, then he couldn't be famous. He wanted to be famous. Maybe even more than he wanted the money. No, maybe about the same. He packed the ointments he'd used on his hands back into a drawer, retrieved the printed pages from the floor, tearing off the last page, and stared through them to the image of a new world. Perhaps he might allow a couple of years to pass and wait out his restraint of trade, then wheedle token employment in a lab at the buyer's organization. Then, technically, it would be theirs. There would have to be several very secretive meetings with some very powerful people in his near future. It was actually a pity he'd done that Popular Mechanics interview all those years ago. Lesson learned. Fly under the radar until you know who your buyer will be. Grimly, he thought, now all I need is a second once-in-a-millennium breakthrough to apply that point. Pain stabbed at his fingers again. It occurred to him that perhaps the ointment wasn't enough. Perhaps he should tend to the medical implications of his electrical shock before doing anything else, maybe even with a hospital visit. He could still move the fingers, A momentary lack of proper respect for the voltage supplied by Edinburgh Power, but the pain was extraordinary. He flexed the fingers a few times, watching the light play over the oily salve. Then he walked to the window and stood staring at the grounds, where security flashlights illuminated the sheets of rain, to the winding streets and adjacent campus buildings. There was no skyline in the world quite like Edinburgh. A nobler thought occurred to him. This might represent the end of crime. His breathing clouded the glass. Barely realizing what he was doing, he lifted his hand and placed the tip of one blackened finger to the glass, upon which he wrote the Latin aphorism, Nosce te ipsum. Know yourself. Oh, they would. Everyone would now. And henceforth, there would be no way to hide who they were. No way at all. After he'd sold it, of course, he fully realized that he would fail his own scan. Absolute knowledge. He breathed the words onto the window pane. 3. Hold still, kitty cat. Okay, here it is. K and T. Best buds forever. Your boob is officially a work of art. It wasn't before? Katrina asked. Vanity, vanity. Okay, here, you do me. Tinks, it's not a real tattoo if you have to write it on with purple marker, Katrina said. You want to get a real one instead? I didn't think so, smartass. Then just do mine. Big enough so the cameras can see when we flash. If we flash, Katrina said. When? We are so doing this. Don't be a baby, kitty cat. Do like the president says. Show the world where you hide your weapons of mass destruction. The girls giggled conspiratorially. Katrina pulled her t-shirt back down over her bra. Tinks lifted her shirt and stood still, back arched, while Katrina wrote the same sentiment across the upper half of her friend's small bosom. They had come a long way since Stubbys Trailer Park, but some things never change. And despite the fact that Tink's blue corduroys had now given way to tight, ridiculously tight, jeans, which housed slender legs, Katrina knew that her friend still wore cheap underwear. Community college fees were enough of a struggle, and push-up bras from a Victoria's Secret catalogue were simply not within her 17-year-old's budget. Katrina still felt bad, the way she had all throughout their friendship. Her clothes were always moderately better. She atoned for her great prosperity, them's $20 sneakers, darlin', by allowing Tinks to swap, share, and wear any item of clothing her buddy desired. Just grab it out the cupboard, girl, whatever you like. I'm totally pumped, Tinks said. Tonight's gonna rock. She flexed her muscles comically before the mirror in their communal dorm room, mimicking a WWE wrestler. Everything this wild child did made Katrina laugh. The room was visibly the product of two teenage girls from a humble background enjoying the early dawn of independence. There were posters of Heath Ledger and Matt Damon on one wall, Brad Pitt shirtless in Fight Club on the other. A large bat called out to Gotham's Sentinel from one corner, and a couple of cartoons of punkish fairies, one throwing up into where the waste bin stood, were crammed against a wall, a sort of 3D art. Tinks had scrawled, "Kiss My Pit," across the bottom of Brad's poster with lipstick. Hello Kitty made liberal appearances too, and the obligatory beanbag, purple and slightly scuffed, took up far too much of the floor space, while the rest was almost entirely covered in discarded items of clothing, panties, socks, jeans, and a 2-day-old pizza box. There were also inks and bunched-up paper hiding colourful smears, heaped into a pile in one corner, along with some brushes that Tinks used in her commercial art classes. Katrina's BA journalism was a less messy affair. Most of that was kept in digital files in Katrina's small second-hand Mac computer, which Tinks shared as well, though, for lack of space, it had to live on a stand beside the kettle, along with the accompanying perpetually sticky, semi-hygienic coffee mugs. The overhead light gave out an odd yellow colour. Tinks had coated it with paint in cloud-like patterns to make their room unique. At the grand unveiling, Katrina had smiled politely at the swampy glow. Looks great. Right, let's run through our checklist, said Katrina. Oui! Tinks answered dramatically in her best attempt at a French accent. "We must be prepared for anything." Katrina was taller than Tinks, and her unruly red hair had settled into the same darker shade as her mother's, to her relief. She wore it long, tied in a loose ponytail that touched the curve of her lower back. Tinks dyed her auburn hair black these days, which almost worked. Both girls were diminutive in build, with little in the way of curves to speak of. But if they wore their jeans tight enough, they got the desired effect. Male scrutiny, Tinks called it. Serious male scrutiny from the hordes of man-muffins roaming this here paddock. Tinks had a nose ring and a belly ring, and was contemplating adding one more through her lower lip. Katrina had just a belly ring. She was trying hard to talk Tinks out of the lower lip idea. "Tickets?" Katrina asked. "Check." "Money?" "Frickin' little of that, Jose. We are a sad lot. But what there is? Yep, check." Jose's not French, but whatever. "Directions to and from the place?" "Well, yeah, check, but I don't think we'll need to find our way back." "Why not?" "Like, what do you think, dude? We'll get some boys to give us a lift. Car boys. Boys of car renown. And then, maybe get 'em to stay a while." "Okay." Katrina puffed air into her cheeks. "Then I guess that's a check too, sort of. Although maybe we should have cleaned up here. Face it, we're just two dirty, dirty girls, babe." Katrina blew air through her lips a second time. "Banner to hold up?" Tinks answered. "And that is a check as well, my dearie dear. Got it right here. Shall we cruise?" "Yeah, I guess that's everything. Oh, wait." Katrina opened the small fridge jammed into one corner of the kitchenette. She winced at the smell of leftovers, which had turned unholy several days ago. Extracting a carton of milk, then a small dish from the sink's drying rack, there was no storage for crockery. She poured a little and opened the window that faced a dumpster and a set of iron fire escape stairs below. She placed the dish on the windowsill. "Okay, we're good," Katrina said. "Yeah, baby, baby!" Tinks shouted. "The ladies are out on the town tonight!" Katrina scooped up the dorm room key and opened the door to the corridor. Tinks made a sound midway between a bark and a growl. Holding her banner like a drum majorette, she pirouetted out of the door, eyes closed, then ended her routine with a kung fu kick aimed at nothing in particular. It nearly connected with a girl and the young man she was illicitly smuggling into the dorm. "Sorry." The couple made no response, but arched their eyebrows as they passed by. "Geez, you'd think if you were getting it that often, you'd be in a good mood from time to time," Tinks said. "Loser." "Coming, Cat?" "That's Marcy Kruger," Katrina said in a quiet voice. "She's in my English lit class. I can tell you this much. She feels sour. And there's been a growing yellow distress that she tries real hard to hide." Tinks gasped. "Pregnant?" "No, it's not that. I think she knows that he's going to break up with her." They watched the two disappear into a room at the far end of the corridor. "And him?" Tinks asked. "Your Geiger counter blip when he went by?" "It did. He is going to break up with her." "You can tell that?" "Yeah, it's very obvious. Right now, he's weighing up getting it over with tonight, or like chickening out. But it feels like he's pretty sure it's tonight." "So he's not gay or anything then?" "No, I'd be able to tell that too." "Cool. So that means you'd know if I had special girly feelings for you." "Knock it off, Tinks." "Oh, baby, baby," Tinks said, hamming up a seductive act and advancing on Katrina. "Surrender your body to me, honey buns. You know you wanna." "Sure, you start without me," Katrina said. She turned off the odd yellow light in their living room and locked the door behind them. The two had remained best friends all through school. They had tallied sufficiently high marks to get into college, Tinks only just so, and were now enrolled back in Katrina's original stomping ground of the Lone Star State. They had both been keen to escape New Mexico, particularly now that Tinks' parents had died. They caught a bus to the downtown Palladium, embarking along with 30 or so other teenagers, and a few confused older working people who'd had the misfortune to travel in the same direction on the night of a live concert. Almost without exception, the kids had headphones in their ears. Crammed tightly together and holding the handrails above them, Katrina whispered, "See this guy here? Dude with glasses on his head? No, glasses dude is sweet, in a quiet sort of way. His worst issue is he can't face up to his parents, and it makes him feel insecure. Like a pale blue with the scent of old cardboard boxes. Tinks chuckled. Now that guy, baldy dude. Tinks leaned in conspiratorially. Okay. This morning, he made one of the biggest decisions of his life, and right now he's regretting it, but big time. Tinks studied her friend's face. They were almost nose to nose. You can tell all that? Uh-huh. Do you know what the decision was? Not in my arsenal. I can only get, the dude himself as he is. You know, like his inner state. I can't get the story outside of that. But that's what he's going through on the inside right now. Guaranteed. Tinks regarded the bald man in the crowded bus for a moment. With khaki pants, a decent t-shirt, and a reasonable build, he looked so very secure in himself. His eyes were switched off, though, stony, allowing no question or quarter. The bus rounded a bend, and everyone leaned slightly to accommodate the inertia. One of the young girls lost an earphone and quickly reinserted it. Let's see if you're right, Tinks said. What do you mean? Tinks bit her lower lip mischievously, flicked her eyebrows up and down, then turned to the strange man. She leaned right into his personal space, and with a straight face said, Screwed it all up, didn't you? The eyes beneath the bald pate remained impassive for a moment, as though he were certain she was talking to someone else. Realizing she was not, the man creased his brow slightly and said, What did you say? You screwed it up, huh? It was like only the biggest deal in the world, and you messed it up, didn't you? Earlier today? How? Do I know you? Should have gone with the other option. That's all I'm saying, Tinks said, then turned away from him and stared straight ahead again, immobile, inaccessible. The man got off at the next stop, started walking in the opposite direction, then, after a few steps, burst into a run. The girls fell into fits of laughter and clung to each other. You are so cruel. You don't know what you've just done to that guy. Finally, they reached their own stop. The bus hydraulics let off a steamy sigh of pack mule relief. Tinks was the first one off. As she hit the pavement, she closed her eyes, aimed her face towards the stars, and breathed in deeply, holding up the queue for a moment. Hey, come on, move along, someone said behind her. Oh, piss off and walk around. I'm having like a transcendental moment here, she said. Then she returned to her position of quiet ecstasy. Katrina found herself constantly alternating between enjoyment and cringing embarrassment with her best friend. As a fairly quiet person herself, she enjoyed Tinks' theatre of life, her loud bravado, but Tinks was also constantly dialed up to 11, and that took some coping with. She bear-hugged her stubborn friend and began dragging her along out of the way. The crowd of kids grew thicker. The noise rose. They drew ever closer to the immense oval structure. Floodlights from within made the place look as though it were alive, and the voices of the crowds inside were already cheering riotously for the first act. This is so gonna rock, Tinks said again. I can't believe we got tickets. Kat, you're a legend. We always said we'd do a Linkin Park concert. Tonight's the night. It is written in the stars, Tinks said, pointing melodramatically at the heavens. And on our boobs, Katrina added, and the two giggled their way into the thick of the queue. There was an intense squeezing and crushing as they reached the bottleneck beneath the large stone arches of entrance 4. Katrina found herself beside an older man who wore a brown coat in a faux military material. Unlike the kids around him, his eyes were not aimed eagerly ahead. They were focused on his shoes as he shuffled forwards. He felt wrong, Katrina thought, entirely wrong. He was like pork that had burnt at the edges, or a sickly sweet ginger spread through grit. And malice. There was also confusion, befuddlement of the kind Katrina had often felt around drug addicts or the desperately inebriated. When she looked more closely at the man, which wasn't difficult, she was pressed right against him on one side. She noticed that his jaw was clenched. He wore a baseball cap with the motif, Shag the Dead. A few moments later, The crowd split into men and women as security guards performed body searches. Tinks hammed this up into an event of erotic proportions, asking the embarrassed young guard whether it had been good for him. Katrina watched as Shag the Dead guy drew closer to the checkpoint. Finally, the two girls were out the other side, and Katrina looked back to see that the security guard had, in fact, detained him. Maybe he has a weapon, she thought. 3 guards held him firmly. Another came on the trot, his walkie-talkie at hand. Good. Whatever warped plans he had, they won't be carried out tonight. Otherwise, the kids around her felt like the norm. A feral teenage mix of hormones and emotions and excitement and potential. Confused and enthusiastic. Not unpleasant. Very much the stuff of life. The crowds carried them onwards, into the dark shadow cast by the building in response to the great lights within. Through the corridor they shoved and nudged. Then up 8 flights of stairs, and the Palladium opened up, sprawling before them, revealing massive sky above, exciting lights below. Tinks bounced up and down on the spot, one hand on Katrina's shoulder, the other clutching their banner. Katrina simply stood, awed, drinking in the enormity of it all. She had never seen anything like it. Without realizing how high they had climbed, they had somehow reached a dizzying level of elevation. Below them were tens of thousands of kids, seated or standing, or moving towards their seats, spotlights roving over their silhouettes like great caressing fingers. The sea of bodies and different-colored T-shirts undulated like some multicolored ocean. The floodlights momentarily turned the stage into that white light at the end of the tunnel, striking and inviting, then moved on. Above them, the Texas stars were crisp and perfect. And the sound. The sound was all-engulfing. Screams and cheers from the crowd, the gunfire drumming and screeching guitars of the warm-up act. Katrina took it all in. It was magnificent. She could feel them as well. Thousands upon thousands of people in a state. It all clouded together into a tangible euphoria. It was like sparks from a tinderbox and sweetened lemon juice and the sensation of giddy falling on that new roller coaster at Six Flags. She could have stood there all night, just experiencing the vibe from the crowd, feeding off it. But people were struggling to get past them. Pulling Katrina by the hand, Tinks hustled her to their seats, meeting people and making crude jokes about personal space all the way down the aisle. They were above the stage and towards the back left of the auditorium. The view of the performers down there wouldn't be amazing, but at least it would be unimpeded. There were large screens above the stage too. Right now they lay dormant as the warm-up act waved, kissed up to the multitudes, and used the name of the city a great deal to whoops and cheers. Katrina and Tinks reached their seats beside 2 young men in their early 20s. One nudged the other, who snickered in turn. The guy closer to Tinks leaned over and said, "You two like holding hands like that?" Tinks turned to him with a straight face. "Actually, we prefer nibbling each other's nipples, but this place is so crowded." It took them a moment to process this. "I'd pay to watch that," the closer of the 2 guys finally said with a smirk. He wore black jeans, black boots, and a white vest emblazoned with the Linkin Park logo. He was white blonde, had stubble on his chin, a single earring and chains around his neck. His friend had dark hair, almost black. He too wore black jeans, with a tight-fitting, long-sleeved shirt, which was also black, but bore no logos. He had a tattoo on his neck, the tail of some sort of dragon, with the head apparently burrowing into his throat. "Why would you pay?" Tinks asked. "Didn't your mama teach you to ask nicely? Maybe you can play too." The guys looked at each other and made a sound in their throats. The one with the dark hair made a show of biting his clenched fist in approval. At this point, Katrina leaned across her friend. "Please ignore Tinks. She's full of it. Hi, I'm Katrina." "Jake," the closer of the 2 said, and shook her hand. Beneath his fair hair and pale brows, his eyes did not widen the way those of a person who wants to establish trust might. "Danny," the dark-haired one said, offering his hand as well. The same flat stare. And this is Tinks, Katrina said. She's borderline insane, but you eventually learn to love her. Or tune her out. I could sure learn, said Jake. He took the lead now that the game was officially on, and Tinks smiled that slightly psycho smile of hers, that I'm interested smile. Katrina rarely needed to read her these days. Her vivacious friend waved her feelings about like the banner they had brought along with them, and she was no barrel of secrets. Her body language and internal states were identical. Nonetheless, she could feel the beginnings of that familiar throbbing in Tinks. It was never far from the surface when Tinks was around boys, or anything with a heartbeat. What you got there? Jake asked. Our banner, Tinks said, unfolding the length of black curtain material over both of their laps. In silver paint against a field of black, it read, Groupies for Rent. There were 2 arrows pointing downwards. Tinks' idea, Katrina said. The guys laughed, but low and with enough restraint to look cool. They never allowed their eyes to light up. Katrina observed this closely. She had always preferred an open laugh and loved to see genuine excitement in people's eyes. Laughter in the eyes made boys look very appealing. Well, the writing on our boobs was your idea, Tinks answered. And Katrina cringed, for she knew the statement would open a can of worms. And it did. Writing on your boobs? Look, Tinks said, unhesitatingly lifting her shirt and turning to show them. She didn't seem to care about the reaction this provoked in the circle of people all around her. It was like a meteorite hitting the ground, the force of the blast rippling outwards for 3 or 4 rows. The sound began with, whoa, then ended with cheers. One kid, a row back, said, God bless America. Dude, that's awesome, Jake said. He pushed a strand of hair out of his eyes with one hand and boldly used a finger on his other hand to stroke and scan the letters over Tinks' cleavage. She didn't pull away. You got it too? Katrina rolled her eyes. Inevitable. Rather than lift her shirt, though, she pulled down her collar, revealing a more modest view of her upper chest. Rippin'. All we got is Danny's pig's head. So, you 2 here alone? No dudes we should be afraid of? Jake made a show of a karate pose with his arms. Just us, Katrina answered. Does that make you all giddy with lust? Tinks was still smiling her psycho smile. If it did, could you handle it? Jake asked. Bring it, baby. Dude, this chick is something else, Danny announced from the far side, speaking to no one in particular. He fingered a pendant on a chain around his neck. Jake continued his charm offensive. Get you girls a beer? As long as you don't mind making out with a girl with beer breath. Tinks, Katrina said. Geez, down, girl. I'll get 'em. Don't go anywhere. Danny, keep these 2 nice and warm while I'm away. By whatever means. Danny threw a salute. He moved over into Jake's seat, filling the gap between them. As Jake shuffled past, he made a point of placing his hand across Tinks' leg, as if to steady himself. The hand remained there longer than necessary. Katrina felt her friend's excitement spike with that action. Her inner response to boys was like a nuclear reactor. Always had been. After the blonde boy had left, the quieter one tried to pick up the banter. He made a few fumbling and witless advances, but lacked the practiced ease of his friend. He was darker, too, Katrina decided. It was hard to read either of them with quite so many people around, like picking out a single flavor in a jumbled fruit medley. Tinks turned to Katrina and whispered in her ear, Oh, we are so gonna do this. She turned back to Danny. What did your friend mean by the pig's head? He meant this. The boy reached into a bag at his legs and pulled out a latex mask. It was a full head cover, the mask of a pig's snout and beady eyes. He stretched it over his own head and turned to look at the girls, making snorting noises. Ew, Katrina said. Tinks laughed. That's totally wicked. Ladies and gentlemen. The lights throughout the auditorium dimmed. They found themselves in momentary, tense darkness. Then an explosion lit up the stage. The crowd rose to their feet by their tens of thousands, and the noise reached a level at which it felt like eardrums might burst. Linkin Park!